unclear what exactly the point of all of this was. Hey folks, I'm Allison. Welcome to my channel. Today's video is a December 2024 reading wrap-up. I'm going to tell you about all the books that I read this month and give you my takes on them, hot, cold, or tepid as they may be. A quick note about spoilers. There may be places where I think it's necessary to give you some information about what is in the books to be able to accurately convey my feelings about them. I will do my utmost not to tell you anything that would spoil the experience of reading these books for the first time, but this video is not going to be 100% spoiler-free. Let's get started. The first book that I read this month was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. The book is about two friends, Sam and Sadie. Sadie's sister has cancer and Sam is recovering from a disabling injury to his foot, and they meet playing video games in the hospital, and then eventually reconnect in college and start designing video games together. The plot is about their professional successes and failures designing these games, but of course the core of this book is the relationship between Sam and Sadie as they first grow to trust and rely on each other, and then eventually come to mistrust and resent each other, and then sort of cycle back around and around throughout the course of their friendship. There is a lot to love about this book. First off, it's an incredibly character-driven book, and the characters are so endearing despite their many, many flaws, and there's no sense that they're sort of getting carried along by the force of the narrative. Every single thing that happens in the story is basically a direct result of their choices and the way that they carry themselves in the world. And I love a book like that. There are a lot of times in books where two characters have a misunderstanding or there's a breakdown in communication, and as I'm reading the book, I'm just thinking like, stop miscommunicating and just say what you want to say. You know, it seems like if they could just sit down for 5 minutes with a marriage counselor, everything would be instantly resolved and the book would be over. But this is not one of those books. This is a book where the characters' experiences and perspectives and trauma informs the choices that they make and the way that they communicate or fail to communicate with each other, so that every time the character wants to say something but can't make themselves say it, it doesn't feel annoying. And I think that is a sign of a really well-written book. Another thing about this book that is fantastic is the aesthetic of the video game world and the way that she describes creative choices that go into designing a video game. I was coming from a place where I don't know anything basically about video games. I have not spent very much time ever thinking about what all goes into a video game, but this book did an incredible job of immersing me in the entire creative process behind putting together these games. So everything from the way that the scenery was going to look, the way that the avatar was going to move its body, is it going to walk in a straight line or stumble around, the way that the story was going to give the player the option of different kinds of narrative choices, and the way that the outcome of the game, if written one way, could communicate a very nihilistic, and if written another way, could present a really optimistic take on life. But there was one thing about this book that I really didn't like. Throughout the book, there are lots of moments of tragedy. For the most part, I completely understood why the author made those choices, to explore the relationship to the depth that the author is trying to do here. But there is a significant tragedy in this book, and if you've read it, I think you'll know which one I'm talking about, that felt just unnecessary to me. And it really pushed the book to a place where it felt like the author was just sort of stress testing the characters to see what would happen. I don't want to target this book as the only book with an unnecessary tragedy. In fact, this book is for me just one instantiation of an issue in the book industry, the movie industry, sort of in culture today, which is the sense that things need to be sad in order to be deep and meaningful. And I think as a result, a lot of movies and books are just tragic kind of for no reason. I felt like there was a bit of that in this book, and that kind of bothered me. But that is a relatively minor criticism of overall a very good book. I think I'd probably give this book 7.5, maybe even 8 stars out of 10. The second book that I read this month was Ancillary Justice by Leckie. I also really enjoyed this book. To be honest, this month was pretty much all hits. Not anything that really, really blew my head off, but also nothing that I didn't basically enjoy. The main character in this book is called Breck, and Breck is an ancillary. Breck has a human body, but for most of her existence, she existed as one small piece of a large multi-consciousness. Lots of different, not people, but ancillaries walking around in human bodies that all shared a consciousness back up to this spaceship called the Justice of Torin. Breck had sort of two perspectives, actually, I think 3 perspectives. A big spaceship, and then there was a sort of medium level consciousness, and then each of the little individual human bodies that these consciousnesses were inhabiting. But through a series of unfortunate events, Breck is cut off from the greater consciousness and ends up just stuck with her consciousness limited to this one human body, and starts out a revenge quest to get back at the person she thinks is responsible for cutting her off from the greater consciousness, and also for doing a bunch of other bad stuff that I won't tell you about right now because you might want to read the book. The plot of this book is basically Breck trying to carry out this revenge plot. She has a sidekick that she picks up, someone that she knew from before. That person has very mixed motives. One of the most fun things about this book is the way that the characters, even though they're often aligned with each other towards a common goal, have very different and quite conflicting interests. The whole time you're having to figure out who can you trust and how far can you trust them, and is this person going to surprise you and betray you, or surprise you and turn out not to betray you when you thought that they might. And so that is a fun aspect of this book. But I think the book's real strength is in the world building. The way that the perspective hops around between Breck as Breck and then also these various different levels of the multi-consciousness is absolutely so incredibly well done. It doesn't ever feel like you're distanced from the action or from caring about the characters by the sort of conceit of this multi-consciousness. Another thing that is really interesting about this book is the way that it plays with gender. So Breck is not human. As she travels throughout the universe, she refers to herself as a she. She also refers to everyone in the book as a she, regardless of how the other characters gender them. The explanation for this is that there are lots of different cultures on all of the different planets in the universe, and those cultures demarcate gender in all sorts of different ways. Some of them don't demarcate gender at all, but as a result, Breck often can't tell the gender of the people that she's interacting with, and that gives this book such an interesting flavor because you often meet characters and you think that they're women, and then halfway through the book you find out, oh, this character has actually been a man the whole time, and Breck just had no idea. The author's pacing is also really good. The way that she dribbles out the next clue and the next clue so you can piece together the history of what happened and why Breck is the way that she is and who all the various characters are and how they fit into the plot. You start very in media res, and then you have to, over the course of the book, as it jumps around into different timelines, figure out exactly how all these pieces fit together. The author does a very good job of it so that it feels very cohesive and you don't ever feel like you're just stuck floating in outer space, you know, with some character that you don't care about and don't understand why we're over here when it feels like the plot is actually over there. My one big criticism of this book is that the last 20 pages, when the action is supposed to sort of resolve, and I understand, you know, this is the first book of a trilogy, and so the action is not going to completely resolve. You want to end on a bit of a cliffhanger so that you then want to go read book 2. I get that. But the way that the action resolves, for the sake of this first book at least, is very confusing to me. It's hard to explain why without really spoiling everything. Basically, towards the end, Breck perceives herself to have kind of somewhat achieved her goal throughout the book. And, you know, it's quite ambiguous, and obviously there are twists and turns, and there's a lot left to be said in the next 2 books. But the fact that the thing that she does that she thinks of as achieving her goal sort of counts in her mind as achieving her goal made me a little bit unsure what her goal had been all along. And it was sort of unclear what exactly the point of all of this was that you spent the last 400 pages reading about. I found that a little bit of a letdown. I don't know, to be honest, if I'm gonna carry on reading books 2 and 3. I'd probably give Ancillary Justice a light 7 out of 10. The next book that I read is actually 2 books. It's The Atlas 6 and The Atlas Paradox by Olivie Blake. I really enjoyed these books. They were absolutely page turners, they were a romp, they were incredibly vibey. The book is about 6 different main characters, and it hops around from the perspective of each of those characters chapter to chapter, who are invited to join the Alexandrian Society, which is basically a secret, fancy, kind of posh club of powerful people who have access to the Library of Alexandria, which has, over the centuries since it burned down, come to be this incredible, huge, magical library with all the knowledge sort of in the world that anyone could ever want. And for various reasons, the characters are each very motivated to have access to the information in the library, and so they agree to basically do a 2-year fellowship with the library. The first year they have to take classes, and then the second year is sort of an independent study. And the first book is about their first year, and then the second book is about their independent study year, and then there's the third book in this trilogy that I haven't read yet that is presumably about when they then go out into the world and have to figure out what to do with themselves. Of course, as you could probably imagine, access to all of this magic and power and knowledge comes with a catch. I won't tell you what it is, but it's a catch. And so the book is about these characters coming to terms with what they would do for access to knowledge and power. There is an interesting conversation about whether knowledge, dangerous knowledge in particular, should be shared widely or should be kept a secret, only accessible to a chosen few. But for the most part, this book is pure fun. It has a strong sort of Gideon the Ninth, dark academia vibe, all of these characters being essentially trapped in a haunted library. Caveat, this book is not Gideon the Ninth. There are no books like Gideon the Ninth. I don't really have any criticisms of the first book. The second book, it has a case of middle book syndrome, which I'm very sympathetic to. I understand that it is very difficult to go from your first book where you're creating this world and introducing all the characters and giving their origin stories, and then you have in mind the third book, which is where you're trying to go. But to do that, you have to get all the pieces in place, and the people have to think the right things and know the right amount of information and have the right motivations to then get themselves into position to kick off the third book. But I think the second book struggled a little bit not to feel like it was a lot of exposition and a lot of characters thinking or feeling or saying things motivated more by where they needed to go than by where they were coming from, if you know what I mean. But overall, I really enjoyed this series. I'd probably give 8 out of 10 to the Atlas 6, maybe 6.5 out of 10 to the Atlas Paradox, maybe 6 out of 10. But I will say I'm definitely going to be going on to read the third book in this series, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it all wraps up. The last book that I read this month is Pure Color by Sheila Heti. And I'm cheating a little bit because I'm actually still in the middle of this book. But it's very short, and I'm definitely going to have finished it by the end of the month of December. I feel like I have just in this video had such a range of books that are, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow was so character driven, and Ancillary Justice was such a world building book, and then the Atlas 6 was such a sort of mystery thriller page turner kind of plot heavy book, and now this book is none of those things. It is a philosophical meditation on life that is very, very beautifully written, very slow, but I think slow in an intentional meditative way, not in a way that indicates the author just couldn't get the pacing right. This book is about a woman named Mira, and basically it just follows her throughout her life, through several significant life events. The first is meeting a woman that she has very strong feels for, and then the death of her father. I wanted to share with you one passage that I think is very appropriate for a December wrap-up video, but that also really spoke to me. That winter, walking through her neighborhood, She saw the little red, green, white, blue, purple, and yellow Christmas lights, which dotted the porches and were strung across the trees in the front yards of most of her neighbors. They shimmered like the most beautiful stars, just giving off their humble light, their cords curled and mangled, their plastic obvious, but they shimmered like the souls of a million long-dead people. That humans felt like adorning a tree with lights at Christmas time made her think that an intuition of some other realm wasn't completely gone from us, that humans still felt something, that there was still something to honor. People wanted to lift themselves up and lift up their neighbors with these silly little adornments, which to her, the winter her father died, meant so much. She walked through her neighborhood choked up with gratitude over all those shining souls that adorned the trees and the falling down porches. Humans knew, they remembered. These lights spoke to our knowledge of another world, the world beyond this world, the world of the spirit. Nobody was thinking it, but they knew it nonetheless. Humans hadn't lost what was most beautiful, our very small and tentative sense of the hidden, magnificent, divine. So just beautiful, absolutely thoughtful and lovely prose. One thing I will say, there are some very oddly explicit uses of figurative language in this book, where I'm just going to give you an example because they come up sort of out of the blue throughout the book, and every time it happened, it took me aback sort of again. But so one example is there's a part where Mira's father dies and Mira experiences his spirit coming up from his body and sort of flowing through her. But the author describes it as his body ejaculates his spirit into her or something really unhinged. The reviews on the back of this book are just like that, there's magic. Heti is a mystic with a sense of humor. She can play the clown and talk God at the same time. So reading those reviews and thinking that this was going to be this deep philosophical book, which it is, I was really not prepared for all of the weird cum references. That said, overall, I'm really enjoying this book. I think I'm gonna hold off on giving it a rating. I'll try to circle back and tell you what I thought about it at some point in a future video once I've finished it. I sort of feel like it would be a shame to rate a book before I've actually finished reading it, so I'm going to beg off from having to give this book a rating. But if you're in the mood for something contemplative during this rainy gray season, definitely pick up Pure Color. Those are the 5 books that I read in the month of December. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you want to hear more from me, please consider subscribing. And thank you so much for spending some of your one wild and precious life with me watching this video. Goodbye.